Welcome back. Continuing our focus on the state's fiscal crisis. What is the way out of all of this? Well, we'll come and take a look at some of the figures again. I mean, there's so many questions about how we got to this place. First and foremost, they talked about the dwindling revenue and how it's also affecting the states greatly. And then one wonders, I mean, here we are talking about the dwindling revenue. We had this challenge previously about income, and you expected that states would have it at the back of their mind and plan towards it. But that's not happening. But how much of the election spending did this also suffer from? Because there are many who suggest that, well, yes, we've always had challenge with income here and there, but we'll come to that in a minute. Okay, well, now we've got these IGR figures back on the screen now, and let's take a look at them. Lagos, Rivers, Delta, Enugu, those are the top 5, and then the bottom 5, and this is according to the 2014 IGR reports as presented by the National Bureau of Statistics, wherein they say you have 13 other states who didn't come up with their figures, so they couldn't give a proper analysis of how all of this happened. But we also do hear some of these governors, upon assumption of office, they always tell you, yes, our key role is to increase our IGR. Is this the best they could come up with from what we're saying here?
Well, I think if you look at IGR, it is always good for a state to at least increase its IGR to a certain level so that it reduces its dependence on the statutory allocation.
What level would you recommend? I mean, because you're looking at some of the states, Rivers, Delta, obviously, they usually have a budget between 300 and 400 billion naira per year. And you're looking at an IGR of, is that 42.8 billion for Rivers? Delta is, beg your pardon, 89.1 billion for Rivers. Delta is about 42.8 billion, which is still about 10–20% of their budget.
Well, you can use as a benchmark a rule of thumb that your IGR must be able to finance your recurrent expenditures. Just a very rough rule of thumb. If you have that, you won't have to depend on, you can then use the allocation from the federal for your capital expenditure. So, once, for example, you have a sort of a recurrent expenditure, because what constitutes recurrent expenditure? Salaries, wages, and allowances, overhead costs, pensions, and other statutory obligations, and as well as fixed obligations, fixed interest obligations from your past debt.
Past debt by the past administration.
Well, I mean, let's say past debt, because government is continuous anyway. So whether past administration or whatever it is, once it is properly incurred, all right, and there are rules for even borrowing the money. I don't think most of the governors are actually following the debt management office's procedure.
Question I wanted to ask: how does all of this play out? The debt management office, office of budget and planning. How do they all fuse together to ensure that these governors or these state administrators appear to stay within the limits? Because they're supposed to be boundaries, are they not?
Yes, you're right. For example, I don't think the federal government can stop any state from borrowing money. But the rules are there. The First Investment and Investment Act, which gives some states opportunities to borrow money. You go to the capital market.
FG needs to sign off.
Sorry?
FG needs to do some sort of sign off.
No. What happens is this: the state can decide whether he wants to borrow money. He approaches the market. Now, he can now decide what type of money he wants to borrow, whether through revenue bonds, that is debt that can easily be financed by revenues from the project to be financed, or whether he wants to use what we call general obligation bonds, that the government will pay back the indebtedness from all its revenues. Now, it is the duty of the government, say the Security and Exchange Commission, the primary market, to ensure that the debt to be raised will be used for the purpose it was meant to be used for. But that has not been the case in the past. They invented a very easy way out, what they call irrevocable standard payment orders. Once a government can issue ISPO to the Accountant General of the Federation, all the government is saying, all the state government is saying is that it's given the authority to the Accountant General of the Federation that in case it defaults, after some months of default, the Accountant General of the Federation can start deducting from source, that is from his statutory allocation. When that is the case, then the state can get into some sort of financial problems because the allocation that will come to the state will be dwindling. Because
the state governors have continuously said that there are deductions that are being made on their allocations by the federal government that were not supposed to be. One being the excess crude account, the other one being the sovereign wealth fund accounts. That's a subject of controversy between the state and the federal government. But let's ask this. Would you say the current situation is the product of a fall in oil prices or recklessness of the state's chief executives?
Well, I would say both. Well, if your revenue is falling, then you adjust your expenditure accordingly. And if you don't want your statutory allocation to be deducted, then you stay within the limit with which you can pay back. And I think that the excess crude account and the sovereign wealth fund were agreed nationally. And it's always good to save for the rainy day. But what we need to do is perhaps to increase the governance of those two deductions from the statutory allocation, from the federally collected revenue. The excess crude account and the sovereign wealth fund, and I think that the state should also have a say in how it is managed, and that is the crucial point. At the moment, the management of the two accounts are not transparent. That is the problem, and the states have at each month's federal allocation meeting, they always question the deductions that are presented to them by either the Minister of State for Finance who comes to the meeting most of the time. So if we can increase the transparency of the management of the two accounts, then there will the noise about unnecessary deductions can be reduced. But let us assume that even these deductions were made, but it doesn't mean that the states should be reckless in their expenditure. Some of the states governors, even though they might be implementing very good, laudable projects, but they must also have an eye, on can I afford these expenditure patterns? But most of them forgot completely, and that is why the debt management office, the regulations that are put in place, because each state is supposed to have a debt management committee headed by the governor, by the ministry that the project is coming from, by members of the legislature. So the government cannot just go and borrow money, as was the case in the past. That's now a state management, debt management. I'm not too sure whether some of them follow that procedure.
That's the fiscal and discipline we're talking about.
Yeah, they just borrow money anyhow. And of course, the regulatory authorities in the capital market also need to come in and say, look, you are borrowing, what you are doing is a revenue bond. You are raising a revenue bond. Let us see the project that this money will be used for. And will the projects actually generate the revenue? But what you see in most cases is that most of the finances raised are used to execute non-revenue yielding projects. And so they now depend on their statutory allocation. Your internal IGR is not increasing, and your statutory allocation is declining. So you get into a situation where you are not even able to meet your debt. Meanwhile, you have already signed off ISPO, that is irrevocable standard payment order, to the Accountant General of the Federation. He has the mandate to deduct at source. Because if it doesn't, it can create problems in the capital market, lack of confidence, and investors can be unhappy. So what the states can do, just like a private sector organization, is to reorganize its debt. They have investors in there who perhaps have invested in this debt, and we have what we call indenture trustees, that the registrars that have, that is responsible for managing the debt for them. Call a meeting of your creditors and then say, look, this is our problem. Can we restructure this debt? That's what we now call structured finance, or what we call financial engineering, innovative solution to a particular problem. That's what it means. So there's nothing which says that you have to keep paying the fixed interest, everything. You cannot come to an agreement with your creditors and say, look, for the next 3 months or 6 months, we may not be able to honor this substance. Can we postpone it? But you'll be paid back again in a subsequent payment. So we are talking about asking for interest payment moratorium. But you cannot do it arbitrarily. You have to do it with the consent of the market. Otherwise, you disorganize the market.
So nothing is actually cast in rock right now. Things are negotiable.
Yes.
ISPO.
Well, once you do that, you can then come back to the ISPO because the ISPO is there, irrevocable. But if you agree with your creditors and there is a letter, so saying it has to be approved by maybe a court of law so that it becomes binding. So that for investors to have that confidence. So if it's approved and everything, and the court now says okay, it's possible, and they now agree, the investors as well as the debtors, now you can now communicate that agreement to the Accountant General of the Federation to stave off the deductions. It has to be organized. You can organize your debt portfolio. That's not you say that you cannot reorganize your debt portfolio.